Okay guys, once you've got the screws unscrewed, take them out, keep them safe, give yourself a bit of space because you're going to need a bit of space. Hold on to the bottom part and just wiggle the top part off. Okay, at that point you're going to have to then get rid of the spring tension, and the spring tension, unfortunately, we try to count the amount of times it turns, but it's quite difficult to do. So we reckon it's going to spring off, and it's going to go off in that direction, which is obviously anti-clockwise, and we reckon between 14 and 15 turns. So when you come to put the spring tension back on, yeah, you want to take it in an anti-clockwise direction, or you turn the bottom part in a clockwise direction, which would then charge the spring. Once you've got the spring tension off, you can then unwrap the B-line. Okay, and you can see there's a little bit more tension there. Take that off. Once you get the spring tension off, then it's quite easy to then lift the spool completely off. Okay, you can then run the rest of the line out. On the underside of the spool, the central spool, is the little ratchet. The ratchet connects into these little cogs here. So as you pulling the cord out, it clicks this onto the ratchet. So it holds it out, but to be honest, it can be quite a pain. So with mine and Marcus's, we actually detached the ratchet. And what they've done is they've held a little spring there with a bit of glue. So you're just going to pick off that bit of glue. Very simple. Get the bit of glue off like that, and then take off the spring from that side. And then what we did was to take the spring across to the little hook. I don't know if you can see that. I'll try and get a screwdriver in there, and we're just going to reattach that spring. I need something probably a little bit more pointed than that. That spring to this other hook at this side, which is about, he says, hopefully about there. So it's another little bit of metal on the side of the casing. So that is now holding the spring open, so that's nowhere near the ratchet. Yeah, you can then, what I did and Marcus did with his, is we hung this up and we used a bit of B-line, on the B-line, because it's a new line. We then used a prusik to take out some of the outer sheath, because the outer sheath of the B-line, when it's new, it's quite big. So what you want to do is try to get as much of that B-line to sit on the spool nice and small. So by milking the outer sheath, this is what we did. We just put a prusik on there and we pulled hard, and we milked it down until we got off as much as the milking as we could from the other end. Okay, so once you do it, get to the other end, and we taped the other end, and this is what I've just done, and we actually milked approximately 3 inches of outer sheath from the end, which has managed to shrink the rope. Yeah, which means that you're going to get more rope spooling back on once you've redone it. Okay, so that is what we did. Milked it all off, job done. Took that off, and then we have to recess this. Now, if you're going to do the full mod version, once you've unclipped the spring there, you can then adjust the housing, because when it comes, the cord is coming out of the large hole, and unfortunately if you're right-handed and you have that on your harness, that means this hole is exposed to lots of sawdust and everything else getting in there. So what we did, we took out the little plug from here, and we got then the cord coming out through that hole. But ideally, we thought, rightly or wrongly, that the hole was a little small. So with any tool, the Dremel little drill or a large drill, you could probably drill this out, but again, you need to make sure it's nice and smooth so the rope going through there isn't going to get frayed with rough edges. So what I'm going to do now is going to get a drill. I'm going to drill this out. Okay, guys. So if your line becomes worn or you've damaged it, you've cut it, it's not a biggie because you can always replace it. So by unscrewing the very small screws in here, you can then split the whole central spool. And as you can see, it's quite a rough, rudimentary attachment. In fact, it's very rough. So it's just beeline stitched together quite simply just to create an eye around the central shaft. Okay guys, so what I'm doing now is I'm having a look inside where the spring is. It's not a big problem if you're taking this plate off. However, you must, if you are retensioning, you can tension it the wrong way and you can end up with spring problems. So it's worth maybe getting in here and having a quick look at some point. Now they're held in by these tabs, so you've got to kind of pull the tabs back away from the metal, from the side into the metal, and then you can get this section out. It's a little fiddly, but it's fairly easily done. Remember that they go back in line. There are 3 tabs. Okay, so I think this spring has probably had issues at some time because somebody has, it's not the best position. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to slightly bend that into shape. So I need a pair of pliers, a few grips, and we're going to try to readjust this because that's not so good. I don't know why it's like that. It shouldn't be like that. So I'm just going to hold the spring here and just a bit of tension, and then we'll check where that's going to sit. Okay, so what we need to do is kind of bend it so that section comes more into line in the center of the spool. Okay, next part is when it comes to supplied, these are reusable cable ties. Now you can use them and they go on to your harness and you can then squeeze that together and then pull them back out. But the big but is it holds the Sidewinder well away from your harness. So it's quite a cumbersome kind of attachment. So it's very simple. You can just take those out completely, remove, and replace with just some normal common garden cable ties. We bought a packet of them because we were forever taking them off and trying different situations. So you can put your normal cable ties, which are of course smaller, but they are so strong you're not going to damage them. It's just impossible. So we then refitted with normal cable ties, and when you come to do some adjustments you just cut them. You know, they're pennies. So you just refit with normal cable ties, then it sits a lot closer than it would be if it was something like that. Yeah, still very strong. So what we've done now is we've managed to straighten up the spring. I don't know if you can see through the hole, but we've now got the spring right in the centre of the hole, because that's got to go across this central shaft here. We put it back together. We've disconnected the spring and the hook, which would then connect onto here as part of the ratchet. So it's not an issue getting it back on. Just look down the centre, find the spring, and put the spring over the central part. And there you go. Then you need to rewind your cord beeline back on. Now there's many ways of doing this. You want to try and keep it tight and think about the size of the cord and plaiting it, threading it, he says, back on smoothly. Okay. It's harder to do it trying to retract with all of the cord out. tension the spring and try to get it retracting back in. It's easier to put some cord on first, some beeline on the spool, and get that sitting in nice and tight. The more you use the beeline, the thinner it will become, and it will sit a lot better on the spool. It's a little fiddly. And as you build it up, you're trying to build it up in layers. Fit as much as you can on there. Bit fiddly, and we keep hockling the rope as we're twisting it. Ain't great. What you want to do is get to a point where you don't overfill it. So I filled kind of the drum at the moment, but we've got plenty of movement, freedom of movement. So we then want to tension the spring, okay? So the spring itself, we want to turn, as you can see, we're tensioning it. So turn it, yeah. So we're counting, well, I'm trying to count, done about 4 turns, 5, 6, 7, and it's getting harder to turn. So you don't want to go too crazy, bearing in mind how much slack we have out. So we've now used the little drill. We've drilled out the hole with one of these little things here. We've managed to make the hole a lot bigger, so the cord has got plenty of room to go back in. We've taken away as many of the rough edges as we can. There is a point where it will still stick out of approximately 1 metre. There will be about 1 metre of cord. It can't physically go all the way back in. But at the end of the day, you still need to be able to do your double fisherman's knot anyway for your carabiner on one end. Plus, so that onto your carabiner. Then you're going to have a friction device, so whether you're using the cinch or the positioner to hold it in, so they will still have a certain amount of rope sticking out. Okay, we put the smaller cable ties in there, so all that they need to do now is to replace the screws. So as you can see, once you mount it on the harness, it's fairly tight to the harness, so you haven't got a lot of movement there. You'll have to pick your spot. It seems to be that the tree motion harness, it favours better than others, but because you've got the avid holes that are already pre-cut, and we just sliced across one of the holes there to put the cable ties through. But you know, position is everything. We tried it around the very back of the harness. Unfortunately, we then found there was a lot of friction coming around the body. We tried it on the side, but then that kept catching the arms, so halfway between the side and the back appeared to be, for us, has been the best position. I'm using a little Petzl plastic snap gate there, so I can then just roll out, get my line. As you can see, I'm using a positioner. The positioner I didn't think was going to work because it's rated from 11 to 13 millimeter, but actually, even though it's 10 mil, it works perfectly well. And the rope then slides all the way out through the positioner and retracts back without the added ratchet to stop it. So here I'm just pulling through, clip in, tension, and there you go.